There's something about long stretches of highway that feels both freeing and unsettling. Endless roads, eerie silence, and the nagging feeling that you're completely alone out there. But sometimes, you're not. This story was told to me by a man named Carter. He swears it's true, though he wishes it wasn't. Carter was 25 at the time, fresh out of college and eager to see the country before settling into his 9-to-5 life. He planned a solo road trip across the western United States, from California to Montana. It was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to disconnect from the chaos of city life and soak in the beauty of nature. But what he got instead was a nightmare he can't forget. It started on a quiet stretch of highway somewhere in Utah. The road was desolate, framed by endless desert and jagged cliffs. Carter had been driving for hours, and the late afternoon sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the landscape in deep shadows. He hadn't seen another car for miles. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Carter noticed something strange up ahead. A figure standing by the side of the road. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a faded brown jacket and jeans. He was holding out his thumb, the universal sign for a hitchhiker. Carter hesitated. He had always been told never to pick up hitchhikers, too risky, especially when you're alone. But there was something about this man that tugged at him. Maybe it was the way he looked so desperate, or the fact that the nearest town was hours away. Against his better judgment, Carter slowed down and pulled over. The man approached the car, his face hidden in the shadows of dusk. When he spoke, his voice was raspy, like he hadn't used it in days. "Thanks for stopping," the man said. "I've been out here a while." Carter nodded, trying to hide his unease. "Where are you headed?" "North," the man replied vaguely. Carter didn't press for details. He unlocked the passenger door and the man climbed in. That was the first mistake. As they drove, Carter tried to make small talk, but the hitchhiker wasn't much of a conversationalist. His answers were short, his tone flat. There was something off about him, something Carter couldn't quite put his finger on. The man's presence felt heavy, oppressive, like a dark cloud had settled over the car. Carter tried to shake it off, blaming it on his overactive imagination. About an hour into the drive, the hitchhiker finally spoke. "You ever hear about the people who go missing out here?" Carter glanced at him, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" The man turned to look at him, his face eerily calm. "There's a lot of open land out here. People disappear all the time. No one ever finds them." Carter felt a chill run down his spine. "That's unsettling," he said, forcing a nervous laugh. The man didn't laugh. He just stared out the window, his fingers drumming lightly on the door. A few minutes later, the man asked to use Carter's phone. Carter hesitated but handed it over. The hitchhiker fiddled with it for a moment before handing it back, saying it didn't have signal. Carter thought that was odd. His phone had been working fine just minutes before. As the night wore on, Carter grew more uneasy. The hitchhiker's presence felt wrong, like a shadow that didn't belong. Then, out of nowhere, the man said, "You should pull over." Carter frowned. "Why?" "Just pull over," the man insisted, his tone suddenly sharp. Carter's instincts screamed at him to keep driving, but he found himself obeying. He pulled onto the shoulder of the road and stopped the car. The hitchhiker turned to him, his expression unreadable. "This is where I get out." Carter was confused. They were in the middle of nowhere, no towns, no lights, nothing but darkness and desert. "Are you sure?" Carter asked. The man didn't answer. He just opened the door and stepped out. Before closing it, he leaned back in and said something that made Carter's blood run cold. "Thanks for the ride. You're lucky it wasn't your time." And then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Carter sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, he shook it off and drove away, eager to put as much distance as possible between himself and the hitchhiker. But the story doesn't end there. Later that night, Carter stopped at a small motel. As he was checking in, he mentioned the strange encounter to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. When he described the hitchhiker, her face went pale. "That sounds like—" "No, it couldn't be," she said, shaking her head. "Who?" Carter pressed. "There's an old legend around here," she said slowly, "about a hitchhiker who died on this highway decades ago. They say he still wanders the road, looking for rides, but if he gets in your car, well, let's just say not everyone makes it to their destination. Your car? Well, let's just say not everyone makes it to their destination." Carter felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He didn't sleep that night, and he cut his road trip short the next day. This story comes from a woman named Sarah, a travel blogger who had driven through every state in the US without incident, until one trip left her shaken to her core. It was in the summer of 2018 when Sarah and her best friend Lisa decided to embark on a cross-country road trip. They planned to camp along the way, exploring remote national parks and hidden trails. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, but it turned into a nightmare neither of them would ever forget. One late afternoon, they found themselves on an isolated stretch of road in Arizona, surrounded by nothing but towering rock formations and a blazing red desert. The GPS showed their next campsite was over 2 hours away, and the sun was quickly setting. "Maybe we should stop at the next town," Lisa suggested, scrolling through her phone. But there wasn't a next town, at least not one listed on the map. They were in the middle of nowhere. Then, as if on cue, they spotted a faded wooden sign by the side of the road. "Gas, food, and lodging, 10 miles ahead." Relieved, they decided to check it out. The road to the gas station was narrow and cracked, winding through a valley of jagged rocks. The deeper they drove, the stranger it felt. There were no other cars, no lights, just the occasional rustle of desert wind. When they finally arrived, the place looked like something out of a horror movie. It was an old, run-down gas station with a single flickering light above the pump. A small diner sat next to it, its neon open sign buzzing faintly in the dusk. The parking lot was empty except for an ancient-looking RV that had definitely seen better days. "This is creepy," Lisa muttered, but Sarah brushed it off. "It's probably just a small-town vibe," she said. They pulled up to the pump and Sarah got out to fill the tank, while Lisa headed into the diner to grab snacks. As Sarah waited for the tank to fill, she noticed something odd. The windows of the RV were completely covered with aluminum foil from the inside, every single one. Her unease deepened when she realized the nozzle of the gas pump was leaking a strange, thick liquid. It didn't smell like gasoline. It smelled metallic, almost like blood. She quickly put it back, deciding they'd get gas elsewhere. Inside the diner, Lisa was standing at the counter, talking to an older woman with stringy gray hair and a blank expression. The diner was eerily quiet. There was no music, no chatter, just the faint hum of a refrigerator. When Sarah walked in, the woman's eyes darted to her. They were cloudy, almost milky white, like she couldn't see properly. "Just passing through?" the woman asked, her voice raspy. "Yeah," Sarah said cautiously. "You should keep it that way," the woman replied, her tone low and cryptic. Before Sarah could ask what she meant, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind her. She turned to see a man emerging from the back of the diner. He was enormous, at least 6 feet 5 inches, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes that never seemed to blink. "Need help finding your way?" he asked, his voice deep and unnervingly calm. Sarah shook her head. "No, we're good. Just leaving." She grabbed Lisa, who was still frozen in place, and dragged her out of the diner. As they walked back to the car, they noticed the RV's door was now slightly open. Someone, or something, was watching them. Lisa fumbled with the car keys, her hands shaking, but as they climbed in and started the engine, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror. Two figures were stepping out of the diner, the man and the old woman, both staring at them with blank, emotionless faces. They sped off, hearts pounding, desperate to put distance between themselves and that place. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. About 20 minutes later, they noticed headlights in the distance behind them. A large vehicle was following them, its high beams glaring in their mirrors. "It's the RV," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. The vehicle sped up, tailgating them aggressively. Sarah pressed the gas pedal to the floor, trying to outrun it, but the RV kept pace, its engine roaring like a beast. Then, suddenly, the RV's headlights flickered off. When Sarah glanced in the mirror again, it was gone. Completely gone. The rest of the drive was a blur. They didn't stop until they reached the next town, collapsing in a cheap motel room for the night. The next morning, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She searched online for any information about the gas station or the diner. What she found made her blood run cold. The gas station had burned down in the 1970s, killing the family who ran it. According to local legends, travelers who stop there never make it to their destination. Sarah and Lisa never took a road trip again. This story was shared with me by a man named Eric, a seasoned trucker who's seen his fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing compares to what he experienced one night while hauling freight through West Virginia. It was a cold November evening, and Eric was behind schedule. His route took him through a remote stretch of forest where the highway twisted and turned through miles of dense, towering trees. The road was nearly empty, save for the occasional passing car, their headlights disappearing quickly into the darkness. As midnight approached, Eric's GPS began acting up. The screen flickered, then froze, before completely shutting off. Annoyed but not worried, Eric relied on his instincts to keep going. After all, he'd driven this route dozens of times before. But then he saw something he didn't recognize, a narrow dirt road branching off to the right. It wasn't marked on any map he'd seen, but his instincts told him it could be a shortcut. Hesitant but desperate to make up for lost time, Eric turned onto the dirt road. That was his first mistake. The road was rough, barely wide enough for his truck, with thick trees pressing in on both sides. It felt like the forest was swallowing him whole. His headlights barely pierced the darkness, revealing only more trees and the occasional rustling of branches. As he drove deeper, an unsettling realization crept over him. There were no signs of life, no houses, no streetlights, not even a stray animal. It was as if this road had been forgotten by the world. About 20 minutes in, Eric spotted something up ahead. At first, he thought it was a deer, but as he got closer, he realized it was a car, an old rusted sedan parked at an awkward angle, its hood crumpled and windshield shattered. Eric slowed down, scanning the area for any sign of the driver. The car looked like it had been abandoned for years. Vines wrapped around the wheels, and the paint was peeling away in chunks. Something about the car made Eric's skin crawl, but he couldn't quite explain why. He considered stopping to investigate, but a deep, primal instinct told him to keep moving. As he pressed on, the road grew narrower and more treacherous. The trees seemed to close in, their gnarled branches stretching toward him like skeletal hands. The air inside the truck felt heavy, stifling, as if the forest itself was pressing against him. Then he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a woman wearing a tattered white dress that fluttered in the wind. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her long, dark hair obscured her face. Eric slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. The truck screeched to a halt just feet away from her. "Are you okay?" he called out, rolling down his window. The woman didn't move. She didn't even flinch. Eric felt a deep sense of dread, like his body was screaming at him to leave. But before he could react, the woman slowly raised her arm and pointed to something behind him. Eric's blood turned to ice. In the truck's side mirror, he saw movement, shadowy figures emerging from the trees, dozens of them, all walking toward his truck. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets being yanked by invisible strings. Panic took over. Eric slammed his foot on the gas, swerving around the woman and speeding down the road. The truck bounced and rattled as he pushed it to its limits, desperate to escape whatever was out there. The figures didn't follow him, but the woman did. Every few seconds, he would see her in the headlights, standing in the road, closer than she should have been. No matter how fast he drove, she was always ahead of him, her twisted form illuminated in the harsh glow of his high beams. Eric's mind raced. How was this possible? Was he losing his grip on reality? After what felt like an eternity, he spotted a clearing up ahead. The dirt road merged back onto the highway, and Eric didn't hesitate. He veered onto the asphalt, the truck's tires screeching as he barreled back onto the familiar path. When he finally glanced in the rearview mirror, the woman and the figures were gone. Eric didn't stop driving until he reached the next truck stop, where he parked and stumbled inside, shaken and exhausted. He tried to tell the clerk what had happened, but the man just gave him a strange look. "You must have taken the old logging road," the clerk said. "Locals don't go near it. They say it's cursed." Eric pressed for more details, but the clerk shook his head. "People go down that road and don't come back. You're lucky you made it out." Eric never drove through West Virginia again.